Disorientation is one of the problems for a playwright who often lives in another world in his mind. And I was at Waterloo Station a number of years ago, and I was at the ticket office, and I said, "Ticket to Waterloo, please." And the man in the ticket office said, "Try again." I said, "Oh, sorry, yes, of course, I am at Waterloo Station." Very stupid of me. And, I could not think where I was going. There was a large queue of people behind me in the rush hour, so I said, "Well, what have you got?" Rather like a clergyman friend of mine who was caught out. He was a low church clergyman, and he was in a high church context, and somebody came up to him and said, "Dominus vobiscum." I had no idea how to respond to this, so he just said, "Et tu, Brute." Disorientation is what we are facing when we look at the rapid changes we've been hearing about today. I'm certainly trying to adjust to lots of things at my age, bordering 60. It was Solzhenitsyn who said, when he came out to the West many years ago, that for the first time in our human history, we may be in a situation where our physical survival may depend upon our spiritual revival. The chief rabbi came up with a wonderful phrase recently, and his phrase was, "We need ecologies of hope." We need environments in which hope can flourish, the ideal environments in which hope can grow again in some cases. See, hope and despair are not opposites. Cynicism is really the opposite of hope. Cynicism is a state of mind where nothing changes, nothing can ever surprise you again. Despair can actually be a very fertile ground for hope. I wonder if you can guess which famous person of the 20th century wrote these words: "I want to speak, yet nothing comes. I find no words to express the depths of darkness. The darkness is becoming greater. Sometimes I feel the pain is so great that everything will break. The smile is a big cloak that covers a multitude of pains." That was Mother Teresa. Yet was there anyone in the 20th century who was able to create a marvelous ecology of hope better than her? It was an incredible personal journey and a battle against despair, but one thing she never was: never cynical. Cynicism is abroad in our culture. We see it in politics. We see it among writers and artists. We see it in comedy. Underlying a lot of our laughter, sometimes there's a sense of cynicism. That is the enemy, not despair. It's a wonderful thing to try and find ways forward as we battle on in life. And I think that the first thing that perhaps we need to do is to move from a bad news culture to a good news culture. The bad news is overwhelming that's coming at us from all sources at the moment. How do we deal with a situation where you can just watch a few hours of the news and you think the world is almost about to end? It was Martin Luther who said, when asked, what would you do if the world was going to end tomorrow? He said, "I'd plant a tree." We need to take the long view. I believe this is one of the ways that we can create an ecology of hope. I want to take you back for a moment to an experience of mine in South Africa in 1979. I was privileged to work with people briefly, with Desmond Tutu and with many of the South African writers and thinkers, people I met, and preachers too. And I worked in townships. And in Umlazi Township, I want you to picture a church service, virtually a shack. And it's full of people. It's heaving with people of all ages. There's old men with trousers tied up with string. There's little children running around. There's big ladies and there's chickens running through the church. Quite an extraordinary situation. And I was doing some comedy sketches. What was so wonderful about this was that people literally fell off their benches laughing. I've never seen laughter at this level. It was an incredible experience. And yet, at the end of that service, the preacher called the congregation up, every single one of them, to the altar and asked them to pray that God would save Africa. And they came out to the youngest child. From 3 to 93, they came out. And with tears streaming down their faces, they prayed that God would save Africa. I'll never forget this. I can't quite imagine it in the context of this country. Can you imagine an announcement? At the end of the service, there will be tea and biscuits in the church hall, followed by the entire congregation weeping and singing and pleading with God to save Scotland. You can't see it. Now, whatever your religious beliefs, I'm sure you would have been as moved as I was by that picture. And one of the reasons I was so moved by it was because here was a culture that was playing the whole piano. I realized that in Britain, in my kind of background, I had grown up playing on one octave. Very, very delicately on that octave. In fact, I'd actually never seen my mother cry growing up. I was from that kind of background. And here was a culture where there was tears, rage, laughter, sorrow, despair, everything. The whole piano was being played. And I think it was in Umlazi, in that township, that I learned that one of the ways of discovering hope is to be able to express everything. That is, of course, the task of the playwright and the artist. One of the other things I believe that we need to do is to move from the culture of celebrity to the culture of celebration. I often feel where I live in the far north of Scotland, and a lot of writers and artists and actors in particular, because I work with a lot of actors, come and stay with me, and sometimes people are 100 foot tall or they're 1 inch tall, but they find it very difficult to be the right height. I'm where I should be. I'm not more important than anybody else in the universe, but I'm not less important. Very difficult to find that. And I believe that we need to start living in the present to do that, the present moment. The celebrity culture is always making us yearn for what's going to happen tomorrow. The wrong kind of dreaming sometimes. What's going to happen tomorrow? And I take lessons from my dog on the beach. It's quite wonderful. Every day I take her on the beach, and she's a sheepdog, and she looks over the sandhills, and she looks and she says, in her doggy mind, waves. What's that? And she runs into the water and she dog surfs along the waves. She hasn't got any sheep to herd, so she herds the waves. But the great thing is that the following day I take her again and she looks at the sea and she says, what's that? Waves. And she runs down the beach again. Every day she's living in the present. She doesn't agonize. She doesn't think, I wish I hadn't made such a mess of things when I was a puppy. She doesn't think, what if I can't find that bone tomorrow? She lives in the present. And it's marvelous listening to Dorothy just now, because my father is 100 years old this year. And he lives in the present because he can't remember what happened an hour ago. And he can't remember what's going to happen in an hour's time. He's in a state of beatification. He is constantly in a state of gratitude. I give him a cup of tea. He says, marvelous, thank you so much. Piece of cake, thank you very much. Even if he falls over, he says, as we pick him up, marvelous, thank you very much. He's in a state of gratitude. You know, there are whole world religions that have tried to reach this state of living purely in the present. It's an absolutely wonderful thing. To be fully present is to be fully alive. It's a hard state to attain to. I also believe that we need to move, and we've heard a lot about this today, from a materialistic to a spiritual culture. Do you remember that advert years ago? I think it was a Labour Party advert, but the advert was just a big heading, and it said, it's the economy, stupid. It's the soul, stupid. What does it profit a civilization if it gains the whole world but loses its soul? I had to write a play a number of years ago about John Muir, the great Scottish lad who went out to America and became the father of the conservation movement. A remarkable man. And Yosemite National Park, and he took presidents out camping under the great sequoias and looking up at the stars. And John Muir said this. He said, about his whole life out there in the open, he said, it wasn't like taking the veil. It wasn't a solemn forswearing of the world. I only went out for a walk and finally concluded to stay out, to till sundown. For going out, I found, was really going in. That's one of the great routes, I believe, to recovering our spiritual inheritance. Whatever we may believe, to get back in contact with the world, we should take our arguments and our despairs and our questions and our cynicism for some very long walks. I also believe that we need to transform a culture of communication, and we've heard a lot about the technology of communication and quite remarkable and wonderful things. But I believe that we need to move from a culture of communication to a culture of communion. I really believe that as a communicator, and this is my 40th anniversary as a playwright, I can hardly believe it. I spent my life in communication of various kinds, in film and television, radio and theatre. But I've increasingly come to believe that what people long for is not communication, but is communion. We're all looking for true connection. We're looking for a loving community. We're looking for sympathetic and mutual understanding. We're looking for an ecology of hope. It's hard, actually, to find these communities sometimes. It may not be our family. Somebody once said that a family can be defined as a band of self-seeking individuals loosely held together by the television set. We may have to build our own families. Maybe it's just one person. Maybe it's just two. As we seek communion, we may have to create our own little communities, our own little ecologies of hope. People that can hold us and accept us as we are. Well, in order to find that, you sometimes have to be that to others. Compassion is a word that we've just heard from Dorothy about the situation of old age. It's tremendously important that we learn compassion. And that also means being vulnerable. The most compassionate people are often those who are most vulnerable. And to be vulnerable, vulnerability literally means wound ability. From the Latin vulnus, wound. Woundability is something we need to cultivate. We really do need to learn to listen. It's an art. And sadly, in our culture of communication, there's an awful lot of chat. There's not nearly enough silence. There's not nearly enough listening. Well, personally, I believe that we're made for love, and we're made for communion with each other, and we're made for communion with the physical world and with spiritual reality, which is so close and yet so far beyond. Well, how can we find hope, then, against the odds? How can we hold it all together, the negatives and the positives, becoming a fertile ground, an ecology of hope? Well, all right, what's the big idea? Here's William James, writing a very long time ago. He says this: "I'm done with great things and big plans, great institutions and big successes. I'm for those tiny, invisible, loving, human forces that work from individual to individual, creeping through the crannies of the world like so many rootlets, or like the capillary oozing of water, yet which, if given time, will rend the hardest monuments of human pride." Against the concept of the big society, even the big-hearted society, we need to remember that small is beautiful. Here's Mother Teresa again. When asked how we could deal with all the overwhelming suffering and the hopelessness in the world, she replied, "One person at a time." Thank you.